Okay, we haven't been on for a while, for a week or two. Welcome to Church Without Walls. I'm John, and she is.
Payton.
One of these days you're going to say annoying. I'm teasing. We haven't been on for a while, and so we want to do a couple of things today. Two real shorts. This first one's going to be real short. It's going to be a grief hack. Most of you know who listen to the show know that we lost our son last August, and certain things come up that are new for us because we haven't gone through something like that, and I want to share for other people who are carrying their grief, bereaved parents, or maybe you lost your spouse or somebody close to you, or even somebody grieving loss of a relationship, anyone going through grief. So consider this a grief hack, but I want to talk to you today, and it's going to be short, short and sweet. Because we're going to come on again in about 15 minutes and talk about Jesus. But in this one, I want to share what I call a grief hack with you. And really this subject is the question that people carrying grief dread, or the question that, especially, particularly for me, that grieving parents dread, right? So I'm going to talk to you about that. But to talk to you about that, I have to share possibly a confession with you or compare it to something, because I don't want to hurt people's feelings. And I know that oftentimes this question that I'm about to share with you is always, it's always meant well. It's always meant to say, I love you, I care about you, and I want you to feel better. And so I'm not trying to shame anyone or make you feel guilty, because I actually catch myself still saying this to people who are in grief, even though I've known it's uncomfortable. But first, let's talk about my dear mother and what I learned from my mother after she lost her mind. And I say that affectionately because my mother had Alzheimer's, and we took care of her the last few years of her life. And it was a learning experience for all of us because we weren't trained. We weren't trained caretakers for somebody with Alzheimer's. So this is actually an Alzheimer's or a dementia hack as well, what you're about to hear, because it was a horrible way to learn this lesson. But it was memorable because we never made this mistake again. I never made the mistake again because it was myself who made the mistake. But for some reason, and I don't know if it's the same with everyone who's going through memory loss and dementia or Alzheimer's, but they lose their memories going backwards. In other words, my mom would forget not only what she had for breakfast 15 minutes after breakfast, but she wouldn't remember having breakfast. Okay, so it got to that point. But she did remember, living on Ashland Avenue in Chicago, and she could remember things from further back in her childhood, and they kind of revert into that. And so there was a time where my mom didn't know anymore that I was her son, but I was somebody familiar to her, and for a while she thought I was her brother John, because she had gone back in time. And maybe I resembled her brother John, or maybe something about my demeanor, or she heard people calling me John. And then a while later, I was just the doctor or the nurse, because she saw me as somebody taking care of her, and she just deduced I was the doctor or the nurse. But she never lost that sense that we had a loving bond, right? She'd smile, she'd kiss me 3 times when I'd put her to bed, all that kind of a thing. But early on, I made a lot of mistakes because there are different phases of Alzheimer's, and there are some that are a lot more difficult than others, right? And there was this one phase where they're trying to figure a thing out. The worst thing about it is that they're confused. And the best thing you could do for somebody who's confused, like a lost child that you find, a lost child at a mall who's like desperate because their mom or dad isn't around, is try and keep them calm and assure them that things are going to be okay. So you want to bring them comfort. You want to give them some sense of comfort, because this is like their worst moment, right? That kind of confusion. And at one point, my mom, she constantly asked to go home, even though she was in her home. We had moved in with my parents that take care of my mom at this point before we moved her home to our house. And she was home, but she didn't recognize the home. To her, she lived back with her parents and her brothers in the city of Chicago, in the Syrian neighborhood in Chicago. And so she'd ask me to take her home. And at one point she asked about her mother. And her mother had passed away many years ago. I mean, her mother passed away before I was born. So, 60 years at the time, maybe she had passed away. But my mother asked about her mother. She said, "Where's Mom?" And I made the mistake of telling her the truth. I said, "Mom, your mother passed away 60 years ago, or many years ago." And I saw my mom experience the death of her mother for the first time, because she didn't know her mother had died. And she had just been told by somebody that her mother had died. And it was the most horrific experience for me, because I saw this little girl find out that her mother had died, and she didn't know. And she just dissolved into tears. And immediately I knew I made a mistake. And from then on, we realized that you don't tell somebody with Alzheimer's the truth. You deflect. Even if you have to lie, God will forgive you. And the only thing about Alzheimer's that saved me there is a few hours later. It took her a few hours, but a few hours later, she had forgot the experience happened. Right? So if you do make a mistake, if you're a caretaker of somebody with Alzheimer's, don't be terribly hard on yourself, because that is one of the blessings of the disease, is that you get another chance in a couple hours. And so I never made that mistake again. I realized at the time I made the mistake, I had just witnessed something horrific. Not only had I heard about how close my mom was to my grandmother, but I just saw the despair. I lived it. I saw the despair of this little girl, found out her mother had died, the closest thing in her experience to love. And so I never again made that mistake. I realized that when you're dealing with somebody with Alzheimer's, you don't want to do certain things with them. First of all, you don't want to answer truthfully about every question. She'd ask me where her dog is. Her dog had died. And I said, well, Nate has the dogs, her son, who didn't live with us. I said, Nate has the dogs. They're fine. This is kind of a blatant lie, because her dog had died, but Nate does have dogs, and his dogs were fine. So if you have a problem with lying, don't be a caretaker for somebody with Alzheimer's, because you're going to be a lousy caretaker. You're going to be a crappy person, even though you think you might be following the precepts of the Bible or being a good Christian. You're not. You're just a crappy person. The number one thing with people with Alzheimer's is to bring them comfort, and answering truthfully sometimes will not bring them comfort. It will be a horror show for them, right? They'll be in a continual nightmare, and you want to calm them and relax them, and you deflect a lot. You'll deflect a lot. So when they ask about certain things that are uncomfortable, you deflect and you change the subject, and you bring it to a comfortable subject, and you want to bring them comfort. But so I still think about how awful that moment was when I told my mom the truth about her mother. So anyway, I bring that up to you to say, the only reason I bring that up to you is to say, I meant well. I didn't mean to hurt my mother when I told her the truth. And so I know when people who ask this question, the question that grieving parents dread, that we get a lot. I'm just saying this, and you might have asked me this week. And don't think I'm making this because you asked me this question this week. You're probably dear to me. I love you. Bella just said amen. I'm asked this question probably 24 times a week. So if you ask me this question, you're not on my mind. There's probably 3 or 4 dozen people who've asked us this question since the loss of Carter, over and over. As a matter of fact, I was on a phone call this week where talking to somebody very close to me, very dear, and this person asked this question and its derivatives 3 times in the same phone call, and I deflected the first 2 uncomfortably, and by the 3rd time I just said, I love you. It's been great talking to you. I have to go. So that's another grief hack for those of you who are grieving. It's your grief. Don't feel that you need to meet people's expectations. It's your grief. Carry it as you can at the moment. Okay, it's your grief. But the question is one that means well, and it's the question that seems so natural for Americans because we do care so much about people, and we think it's an act of being courteous, and normally it is. When you ask somebody, "Are you okay?" So the question that grieving parents can't stand is, "How are you doing? Are you okay? Are you good? You good? How are you doing?" There's derivatives of it. There's all kinds of derivatives of it, but it's always in the context of our recent loss, which is the death of my son. So I know you mean it well when you ask, "Are you okay?" Because you want me to be okay. You want Wendy to be okay, and Payton and Connor. I know you mean well. I know you're trying to express your love. I know you want us to be fine, and you want us to be okay, and you want the wound to be healing, and you want us to be in a better place than we were yesterday. But the way we hear it is, "Are you okay since the death of your son? Are you fine with Carter being gone?" That's how we hear it, and the answer to that is hell no. Worse than that, it's F no. I'm not okay. I won't be okay. I'm not fine. In the context of my son, I will never be fine. I will always miss him. I will always have regret that he's not here to share our joy, or that we're not able to share his joy as he graduates college, as he finds the right woman, as he goes on through the life that will no longer be his. So I know the question is kind of a filler for an awkward situation sometimes. You don't know how to talk to people who are carrying this level of grief. But that question is dreaded. No grieving parent wants to have to answer that, because there's only two options to that. We have to lie. We have to say, we're okay and we're fine. And the moment we lie, we feel guilty about it because we're not okay and we're not fine. And we feel like we're cheapening our love or our sorrow even. Our grief and our sorrow for Carter is an aspect of our love for him. Of course we miss him. This isn't like the breakup of a first love, which you eventually get over. This isn't a scraped knee that heals, And so I know that it's just so easy to get caught up in that. My wife goes to a grief share group, and she found herself the other day asking one of her fellow grieving parents, "Are you okay?" And then she heard how horrific that sounds, because she doesn't like to field that question. But it's natural for us as Americans or Christians to ask that question. It's, "How are you doing?" is one of the things that people ask, and it just comes out. So I'm not trying to shame anyone. I'm just trying to tell you that if you can get a handle on it, don't. Don't, because it's like being stabbed to field that question. If I tell the truth, then you're going to feel bad about it. If I tell you the truth, you're going to feel bad that you asked, right? In the same sense that somebody who meets a woman who looks like she's pregnant asks, "Oh, when are you due?" only to find out that she's not pregnant. She's just carrying extra weight. And then you feel horrible. This is what would happen if we told you the truth about how we are doing in relation to the loss of our son. So I know you're thinking, so well, what's a better option? If you really care about this, there are places you can go. This is from GriefSpeaks. It's a Facebook group, but they list 64 of the best things ever said to a griever. And they've got some listed here at the top and more listed at this website that you can go to called whatsyourgrief.com. I would recommend, before I go through this, if you have a loved one who's going through this kind of sorrow and grief, Don't do what I did going into being an Alzheimer's caretaker. Don't go in blind and make your mistakes along the way. Try and prepare yourself. Get a book about grief. Join a Facebook group about grief. Try and learn about it, because there is kind of an etiquette to dealing with somebody who's going through grief. There are things that are horrific to say to them. They're in a better place is like a giant, forgive me, it's like a giant fuck you to somebody who's going through grief. Forgive my language. But it is. It's like the worst thing you could say to somebody is, oh, but don't worry, they're in a better place. Or, well, you have other children. Just, there are certain things you really don't want to say. That go beyond how are you okay? So, if you are going to be around somebody, more often than not, who's going through this kind of thing, and I'm sorry I dropped the F-bomb. It's just that I just wanted to express to you just how it comes across to people who are carrying that grief. But here are some things that are wonderful. There are no words. This is something that people would say on the first occasion of expressing your condolences or something. I mean, you don't say this 6 months after, really, when you're seeing your friend that you've seen 100 times since the death of their kid, unless the subject comes up, right? Because there literally are no words. Words do not... they can make things worse, but they rarely make things better. But there are words that actually resonate with a grieving parent. It's not that we don't want to talk about Carter. I love talking about Carter. So some people take the idea that maybe we don't want to talk about it. Maybe we'll just talk about everything but the loss of our son. And that conversation is usually awkward too. If you talk to somebody that you think cares about you and they completely ignore that you've lost like an arm, it would be strange. If the last time you saw him, you had all 4 limbs, and the next time you're in a wheelchair and your arms have been amputated and they don't mention it, that would be pretty awkward, right? So don't think we don't want to talk about Carter. We love talking about Carter. And the thing that's even better about talking about Carter is having other people talk to us about Carter, right? My friend Steve brought up Carter the other day, and he said, this is one thing I really loved about Carter. And he told me it, and it made my day. So, Carter's ex-girlfriend told my wife, Carter's mother, that Carter was the closest thing to Jesus that she ever met in his love and kindness and his acceptance of other people. I think about that statement all the time, Other things that you could say is, grief has no expiration date. Some of the things aren't appropriate for, just casual conversation, but you don't have to talk. I will just sit beside you. A lot of these sayings here are just to say to somebody who's just suffered this grief. We won't forget him. I don't know what to say, but I can listen. She would be proud of you. I love you. We'll get through this together. I'm sorry. Those are all things you say maybe when you first find out about the grief. But what do you say 6 months later when you see somebody? You say, I love you, man. Give them a hug. Just, if you can share something about their departed, or don't force it, but if it comes up, say something, relate a story. Don't ignore it, don't avoid it, but are you okay in the context of severe loss? No, somebody who's lost their wife of 20 years or 30 years, they're never going to be okay. Even if 10 years later they remarry and they, have children with their next spouse, in the context of their first love or a marriage, a relationship that lasts that long, no, they're never going to be okay with that. They're never going to be fine with that. It's just, and that's how they hear it. Are you okay now that that the love of your life has been gone this long? No, that's never going to happen. We're going to go to the grave not being okay about losing our son and not being fine with it. and not healing from it. We won't heal from it. Now, our grief will change. We talk to other people who have gone through grief longer than us, and the grief will change, and gratitude is the only answer for that, is to be grateful for what we had with Carter and grateful in the memories that we have of Carter. And there will be a balance shift in, the regret, remorse, the deep sorrow and loss will turn, I think, over time and become, more seasoned with gratitude. Or, Peyton and I, we laugh about Carter all the time. Peyton will bring up a strange quirk, or we'll see something in the store and she'll laugh. She'll say, Carter, love those. And we have that, we could cry and then laugh 5 minutes later about Carter. We set up the 3D printer in Carter's room, so we're in there all the time. And so we have that, and we will have that. But so I'm just trying to say to you, if you're going into a conversation with somebody who's carrying deep sorrow or grief over loss, this might be something you want to try and control and not say, are you okay or are you fine? Because they'll either have to lie to you, and if you go online and you search this, you'll see 1,000 testimonies of people who say, I lied today and told them I was fine. And then they're basically confessing to their grief, fellow compatriots, that I feel bad that I lied, but I just didn't want the conversation to go on anymore. It's just like, yeah, let's change the subject because this isn't going to go well. So yeah, things are fine. Things are great. Thanks for asking. How about those Cowboys? How about those Yankees? Yeah, you just want to move beyond it at that point because, it's not fine and it's not okay, and yet you don't want to make the center point of every conversation with this person that, because you are your grief, but you're much more than your grief. So look, if you've said this to somebody, and we all have, don't feel guilty about it because you're trying to express your love to that person. But that doesn't mean you have to be ignorant of better ways to express your love. And sometimes words don't do it. Sometimes just the knowing look and a nod is enough. That says everything to me when I see somebody and they do this and they give me a hug. And then we don't even have to talk about it. We can move on. Or I think that some of the favorite things that people have done for me is they said, I've been thinking about you this week. Or especially during the holidays. It's when Carter used to come home on the weekends from college, and so the weekends are particularly tough for us. And when people know that, yeah, I was thinking about you guys this weekend, and just want you to know we love you. That's the best thing in the world, right? So I just thought compelled to share this with this week, not just personally, because that question that grieving parents dread to get has been true in our experience since August, but for others that you're going to meet that are going through grief, I think it can help you. So, and if you are in the circle of influence or impact of somebody who's going through deep sorrow or deep grief, it doesn't hurt to pick up a book, right? It's Okay to Be Not Okay is a great book on grief, or join a Facebook group. Maybe if you're really close to that person, offer to go with them to a grief share group or something. But at least do a little homework on it, because it's amazing how many things that you expected to be a loving, kind of a healing offering or a gift to somebody can actually be kind of like getting something in your eye, So, grief hack. And we'll do these every once in a while. That's it for now. Poe, you finish this. You want to share it?
Yeah, 1 second.
Now, or you want to share it on the next one?
I'll do it now.
You'll do it now. So Poe's got something to share, even though we're doing a short version. And then we're going to come back to talk about Jesus, apologetics, and how sometimes atheists or agnostics represent Jesus better than his followers. So that's coming up. In the meantime, Payton can. All right, are you ready? So what do we got?
A house.
It's a house?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing to say about the house?
Some house.
It's a house. All right, folks, I could talk about it a little bit. It's a red house. Jimi Hendrix, one of my favorite Jimi Hendrix tracks ever is called Red House. And you probably didn't know that. But basically, Voodoo Child and Red House are two long plays Jimi Hendrix songs. So the first thing I thought of when I looked at this was the greatest guitarist that ever lived. However, it's a cloudy day, sun's out, and there's some nice vegetation in the yard. It's a very small house. The chimney looks like it's tipped over.
No, it's a pipe.
It's a pipe.
It's a
Oh,
pipe.
okay. A pipe coming out of the roof. Looks like it's yeah. Now this is a rather small house. Is this an outhouse? Is this somewhere where you go to the bathroom?
No, it's just a very small house.
For an elf?
Maybe.
Maybe for an elf. So maybe an elf's house. Go listen to Red House, and we'll see you all in about 15 minutes.